talked about why African Americans eat black-eyed peas on New Year's Day. Okay, and it goes back to us being in the South, but also black-eyed peas come from West Africa as well. They're also called cowpeas. So check out that broadcast. We dealt with it a little bit on last week's show. But New Year's Day, January 1st, 1863, was when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln. All right? So History.com has this article, as well as EJI.org, Equal Justice Initiative, which is Brian Stevenson's organization. And we know the movie is out, Just Mercy, which is about Brian Stevenson and a case that he handled. It stars Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. All right, but History.com, which is the official website of the History Channel, has a really good article dealing with this. And this is dealing with Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, attempting to stitch together a nation mired in a bloody civil war. Lincoln made a last-ditch but carefully calculated decision regarding the institution of slavery in America. Okay? Now, contrary to what they teach our children in school today, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free the enslaved Africans. Okay, I encourage people to go to archives.gov. Archives.gov is the official website of the National Archives. Search for Emancipation Proclamation. Or go to LOC.gov. LOC.gov is the Library of Congress. Okay, and when you read the Emancipation Proclamation, it has all these exceptions. Okay, it talks about how the slaves in the border states are not free. It only applied to the slaves in the states in rebellion, the Confederate territories. Okay, enslaved Africans in places like Missouri and Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland. Those were border states. They were still slaves. It only applied to the states in rebellion. It was a military strategy to bring the South back into the Union. The reason why the Civil War was fought, okay, when the Civil War starts, so it starts with South Carolina secedes from the Union December 20th, 1860, okay, and when Lincoln this is 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln becomes president-elect. He becomes president-elect, I think it was November 6, 1860. He becomes president-elect of the newly formed Republican Party. Republican Party was formed in 1854 by groups of abolitionists. The Republican Party was formed as a backlash to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 dealt with letting the inhabitants, letting those who were going into the Western territories determine whether or not they wanted to have slavery in the Western territories, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the federal government. 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe comes out with her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, that becomes an international bestseller. It exposes people across America to the horrors of slavery. And the character of Uncle Tom is based upon the fictitious character of Uncle Tom is based upon the real life person of Josiah Henson, who was a runaway slave from Maryland who becomes an abolitionist. He and his family run away. They go up north and then go into Canada. And he becomes an abolitionist on the Underground Railroad. He becomes a Methodist minister. He becomes an educator, and he writes his autobiography. The fictitious character of Uncle Tom was based upon the real life of Josiah Henson, or based upon Josiah Henson, based upon his autobiography. Okay, there's an episode of The Jeffersons where Louise's cousin, who is a butler, and George says that he speaks proper and sedity. He comes to visit, and George calls him, or actually Lionel calls him an Uncle Tom. George calls him an Uncle Tom also. And he schools them on who the real Uncle Tom was. He talks about Josiah Henson. All right? That's just a little background information. Because a lot of these TV shows, they drop some history in there also. You may not pick up on it. You know, there's an early episode of Good Times. It was actually, I think it was episode 2, Black Jesus. And it's before 76. and Michael talks about Black History Week, because it became a month in 1976. But he talks about, I think it was Muhammad Speaks, where they talked about the true color of Jesus. And J.J. paints Black Jesus, and they put up on the wall. And his mother, Florida Evans, played by Esther Rowe, fantastic actress. She is surprised to find out that in the Bible, it talks about Jesus having feet that were bronze and hair like wool. Now, she's been a Christian all her life, and she ain't noticed. So, I mean, you calling me to ask the question, you know, what have you been studying, right? But all that's in that first episode. Like in the first few minutes of that episode, they're dropping this history. But anyway, so attempting to stitch together a nation mired in a bloody civil war, Abraham Lincoln made a last-ditch but carefully calculated decision regarding the institution of slavery in America. Now, keep in mind, Lincoln was not an abolitionist. I know people want to paint Lincoln as an abolitionist. He was not an abolitionist, because Lincoln was confused really what to do about slavery. He thought slavery was morally wrong, but he didn't know what to do about it. Abolitionists knew what to do about it. Abolitionists were fighting to end slavery. They were fighting to help enslaved Africans run away. They were fighting to end slavery. There's another article from history.com that people should read, and it deals with, I think it's 5 facts about Abraham Lincoln and slavery, something like that. And one of them deals with how Lincoln was not an abolitionist. Now, by the end of 1862, things were not looking good for the Union. The Confederate Army had overcome Union troops in significant battles, and Britain and France were set to officially recognize the Confederacy as a separate nation. In an August 1862 letter to New York Tribune, editor Horace Greeley, Lincoln confessed, quote, "My paramount objective in this struggle is to save the Union. And it is not either to save or to destroy slavery," end quote. Okay, this is 1862. It's August of 1862. The Civil War starts April 12th, 1861. So this is about a year, 4 months into the Civil War. Lincoln is saying, my paramount objective in this struggle is to save the Union. And it is not either to save or to destroy slavery. Malcolm X talked about how Abraham Lincoln used freeing the slaves as a political football. Okay? This is what he was talking about. Lincoln used freeing the slaves as a political football. Lincoln's main objective was to save the Union.